In this first segment of Short Histories, I want to discuss the ancient Greek view on biology in the form of three individuals: Anaximander, Theophrastes, and Aristotle. Now, let's start with the oldest of the three, Anaximander, and he lived from 610 to 546 BC. He was the pupil of Thales and is often referred to as the first proponent for evolution. And his methods and ideology founded the framework for the next two individuals. But just to discuss a little bit of his work, his methodology involved thinking that human children cannot fend for themselves. That since humans exist, there must have been an original creature who could fend for itself and live self-sufficiently at a young age. Now, his theories were not correct, but I'll say them just for the interest's sake. And so, his thinking method said that early humans resembled fish, and that these fish were protected by spiny skins, scales, things like that, and once they emerged onto land, these skins split and gave way to new organisms that were adapted to the new environment, aka the humans. But that's not to say that humans and fish were created at the same time, only that fish came first and gave rise to humanity through this process of change. And other texts suggest that other philosophers may have thought this way, as there's texts saying that fish skins burst, revealing the humans who had already grown to puberty inside the fish. But this has been discredited both through Lamarck and Darwin's theories. But this is significant because it made the framework for the biology that would come later in the form of Aristotle and some of Theophrastes. Now moving on, I'm going to move on to Theophrastes, although much of his work came after Aristotle, as he was Aristotle's pupil companion. And he lived around 371 to 287 BC, and is entitled the Father of Botany. And in two works, Inquiry into Plants and On the Causes of Plants, he made the first systemized study of the plant world, in the same way that Aristotle categorized animals, which we will discuss later. And he studied the distribution methods of the plants, the germination methods, common uses, as a way of dividing and subdividing them into groups. And the first book, Inquiry into Plants, tries to classify 500 plants into different trees, shrubs, undershrubs, herbs. And although he wasn't all that successful, this showed that he understood the features necessary in order to distinguish these plants. But like Aristotle, I meant to say, he wasn't aware of the complexity and the fine distinctions between each of the plants shown in modern classification systems. But now moving on to the big meat of the matter, and that is Aristotle. Now, you've probably heard of the man, he's very famous, but I'd just like to discuss him on a biological side. And he lived from around 384 to 322 BC, and he was the pupil of Plato. And he took great interest in the natural world, not just biology, but meteorology, geography, natural history, things like that as well. But he was known as the father of biology because of the empirical methods, the techniques that he used, which resulted in meticulous record keeping and created a template for future researchers, namely the Islamic scholars that would guard the wisdom of the Greeks and pass it on to the Western world. And he advanced the field of zoology to a level, and an example of this is theory of epigenesis, and he dissected birds' eggs at various stages of their developments, trying to understand the order in which the organs of the growing embryos developed. He noticed that the heart, or what he thought was the heart, first. And so, following this logic, he developed what is known as the theory of epigenesis, or that organs develop in a certain order, a specific order, based on their importance. And this fought a previous logic that all organs were present from conception and just simply grew in size. And since he didn't have any tools such as microscopes, he was actually wrong. What he saw was the spinal cord developing, not the heart. But the idea behind it, the strict development of the order, was correct, and this was not fully established for many centuries. Now, moving on to a different section, taxonomy, and this was the first systematic classification, the history of biology. Now, while earlier people tried to place animals into groups, their classifications were usually broad sweeping, revealing little about the animals other than whether they flew, walked, or swam. Aristotle's zoology, however, included systematically observing and studying a wide range of animals, knowing their similarities, and trying to connect like with like. And he often received exact specimens to study from his sponsor and pupil, Alexander the Great. And this is known to be his greatest contribution to the history of biology, or his first attempt to classify these animals into different groups according to behavior and their similarities and differences between their physiologies. Using tactics like observation and dissection, he could categorize the species as best as he could without the use of modern tools. He went very much in depth, and he noted how some animals have the same organs such as lungs, which kind of animals lived on the land, which kind of animals swam, which kind of animals breathed air. And using these tactics, he developed some classifications. He even went as far as to note what type of environment that they were living in, especially with the aquatic animals, such as did they live in the littoral zone, things like that, pelagic zone, and using also category animals. And although he was wrong, for example, with insects, which he thought did not breathe oxygen, but in fact they do, they just don't have lungs. And he also noticed anomalies in his systematic categorization, such as sharks, which produced eggs, and some produced live young as well. And ultimately, with these classifications, he developed something called the ladder of life hierarchy, where animals were ultimately classified according to their functions, the complexity, and usually the more complex organisms were further up the ladder, with obviously humans at apex. And he posed 11 levels using the forms of the creatures at birth, and he used that to dictate their positions on this ladder. Plants were on the bottom, and some of the lower level animals were the egg layers, and the upper rungs consisted of the higher animals who gave birth to warm, live young. And he also believed that nature was economical and gave no animal too many gifts, observing that no animal possessed both horns, tusks, and pointing out that the chamber stomachs of ruminants compensated for their weak teeth. This was a surprisingly subtle observation by him, and he arrived at the right answer many centuries before Darwin, although with incorrect reasoning. Now, while his predictions were inaccurate, the sheer scale and documentation is one of the landmark scientific texts, and points to the beginning of work in zoology. Just on a side note, a little interesting tidbit is that he thought all living organisms possess souls, and plants would have vegetative souls, animals would have sensitive souls, and humans were the only ones who possessed what he called a rational soul, giving humans the ability to reason and reflect. And The reason he did not attempt to separate the empirical research from this philosophy and spirituality is that he thought the unity was already perfect, and this belief would continue until the rationalists of the Enlightenment period. That's all for this segment. Please comment, like, subscribe this video, and if you have any specific requests that you want to know more about, just don't hesitate to email me at magicalbio@gmail.com. It'll be in this description as well. Thanks for watching.